All right, I got 3 or 4 questions. One of them, and I apologize to the one that asked. I got a question that I should have got to this week and I didn't. It was down at the very bottom of my sheet. Not, Lord, when I get to it next week on where did sprinkling come from? And that's a good question. And I wish I hadn't forgotten it this week or overlooked it, because I would have loved to have spent some time with that this week, but Lord willing, next week. This question came to us through our website. Matter of fact, we've got 2 questions that came through the website. And this one says, I had to chuckle when I read it, but it says, is it biblically correct to bring up to those you have done good to what you've done? Is that right in God's eyes? And I can't, sometimes you get questions and you wonder, I wonder what made somebody send this question. First thing I thought of was, I wonder if this person has been the recipient of somebody's good deed, and then that same person continues to bring it up to them all the time about what they've done for them. I was talking, I won't mention who or when, but I was talking to a brother in Christ one time who told me about a fella that said anytime he did anything for you, he didn't do it for you, he did it for him. In other words, he'll come help you do a thing, and then he's got it marked down on his list, and then when he needs a favor from you, he's going to remind you of what he did for you, so that put you in his debt, so you'll do something for him. Not the way that most of us do it. We help one another, and if I've got to help Walter 5 times, or Walter's got to help me 5 times, it's not like we've got 5 on the list that we've got to make up. But I kind of thought in those ways when I read the question. Look, I could be all wrong, but Jesus spoke to this matter in Matthew chapter 6, when he said, "Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen of them; otherwise you have no reward from your Father who is in heaven." And it says, when you do a charitable deed, when you do your charity, your benevolence, or King James says alms, says, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and the streets, that they may receive the glory of men. Assuredly I say to you, they have their reward. But when you do a good deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charity might be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret shall reward you openly. That's about the first 4 verses of Matthew chapter 6. And so the text indicates to us that we need to do our best when we do good for others to do it in such a way as to not draw attention to ourselves. I think there's some misunderstanding about that text. One is, some people apply the don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. They apply that to the weekly contribution, that the elders don't have any right to know what they give because of that. And that couldn't be more wrong, and it couldn't be more out of context. That's not what the text is teaching at all. Your weekly contribution is not your alms. It's not your charity. But I think it's also good for us to understand that if we went back in Matthew chapter 5, so to answer the question is, no, people should not continue to remind you of the good things that they've done for you. But at the same time, let's look at the other side of that coin just for a second and go back to Matthew chapter 5 and look at verses 13, 14, 15, and 16, where at the end of the Beatitudes, Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then, therefore, good for nothing, but to be cast out and trodden underfoot by men. And you are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand or a candlestick, so that it gives light to all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." Now, I don't think that what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 5 is dealing specifically with charitable deeds. But my point is that we ought to be known as a people who are good deed doers, if I can coin a phrase. We need to be known as a people of charity. Now, balancing that with Matthew 6, it's not a sin for somebody to know that we've done a good deed. I think the key is, how do they know it? It's not a sin for me to help a man and for another person to know about it. The question would be, how does that other person know? How does person B know what I've done for person A? If I tell person B, we've got a problem. If person A tells person B, then I think that's the essence of Matthew chapter 5. That when the good that is done when the person who has been done the good tells others, and they know about it, then that's not on me. That's not me trying to show people how benevolent or how helpful I am. And so the text doesn't teach that it's wrong for people to know. I think the key is, obviously first, in Matthew 6, the key is the intent. What is the intent of doing good? Do you do good so that people will look at you? Or do you do good because doing good is the right thing to do? And then secondly, how does a person know? Do they know because you told them, or do they know because the recipient of the deed has told a thing? By the way, all through the New Testament, now there were a couple of instances where Jesus forbid people to tell what he'd done. And and there was at least one case when he said he didn't listen to Jesus and he went and told everybody what Jesus did, and it ended up being a detriment to his work because the crowds came and they just kind of fogged him and he couldn't do the work that he wanted to do. But there were other times, for example, in Mark chapter 5, with the incident of the man who was called Legion. And after Jesus cast all of those demons out of that man into the swine, that man wanted to go with Jesus. I mean, as the old saying is, he was ready to go with Jesus to the jumping off place. But what did Jesus tell him? He said, you go home and you tell them what great things the Lord has done for you. All right? And so as we think about Matthew 6 in comparison with Matthew 5, the problem is not that people know. The problem would be, first of all, our intent and how do they know. It's so funny because in preparing for this, it's just a day or two ago, I saw a little cartoon meme on some form of the internet, and it showed a guy with a sack of groceries in front of a poor family, a husband and wife and 2 kids, and they were wearing tattered clothes and they looked all tired and haggard. And here's this guy dressed about like me with a small sack of groceries getting his selfie as he was taking his picture in front of this family he was fixing to help. Now, it was a cartoon, all right? But I think it kind of illustrates what we're talking about here in this particular case. And so, Colossians 3, I think, is a good passage for us with respect to what the good that we do. Whatever you do, do it as unto the Lord and not unto men, because you know that from the Lord you shall receive the reward of inheritance. Now, I think that context is, and I'm certain the context there is people who are indentured servants, that they're to serve their masters in integrity, with the idea that I'm not serving a man, I'm serving God through serving this man. And I know that this man has no real reward for me, but the Lord ultimately gives me the eternal reward. So those two passages, Matthew 6, 1-4, and Colossians 3, 23 and 24, I think are helpful for us in this respect. All right, second question is, in Exodus 24:13, where was Joshua while Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and nights? Yeah, I never thought about that. So looking at it, and when Moses went up into the mountain to receive the law, he took Joshua with him. But then Moses went on up, and as they will say, it left Joshua in the fog, literally in the fog, in the cloud, in the mist. And he went on up and received the law. And he came back with Joshua. If you recall, the people had become discouraged because of Moses' extended absence. And then what ultimately happened in that case? They made the golden calf, and Moses was actually talking with Joshua as they were coming back from the mountain. And the question is, where was Joshua when Moses was up on the mountain? All right, you ready? I don't know. That's the best answer I got for you. I don't know. Somewhere between where Moses was and where the people were, which was not on the mountain. Yeah, Walter?
Well, what I was fixing to say, you knew he left him somewhere, then you knew he picked him up.
That's exactly right. We know he carried him up there a ways, and we know that he picked him up on the way back. But in the interim, we don't have any idea. And it was so funny. I thought, well, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's another text. Sometimes you read a text and it doesn't explain it, but you find another text in another place that refers back to it. Well, that text doesn't exist. So I was studying, and here's what one of my favorite Old Testament commentators, Adam Clark's one of my favorite Old Testament commentators, and he talks about how Moses carried him with him, leaving Aaron and the rest behind. The cloud encompassed the mountain. God called Moses up higher. Moses ascended to the glory, leaving Joshua in the cloud. And here it says, with whom he had no doubt frequent conferences during the 40 days that Moses continued with God on the mountain. In other words, Adam Clark don't know either. Adam Clark thinks that God probably spoke to Joshua during the course of that 40 days, and he may well have, because Joshua was the chosen successor, and I think Joshua going with Moses in that particular instance was an obvious indicator that Joshua would be his successor. But we don't have any indication. We don't have any indication that God had any conversations with Joshua whatsoever. In any idea that he did, it's just pure speculation and assumption. So where was he, and what was he doing? Falls into the category of what did Jesus write on the ground in John chapter 8. Just don't know. We don't know, and we're never going to know, unless we get to glory and we remember that we question that. But I got a feeling when we get there, it won't be that important. So the question is, I don't know, and nobody else knows. All right, I got this question. This is going to take a little bit. This question actually was brought to me by a young man at Fayette during the gospel meeting last week, and he said he asked me a question. He says, "Is all dancing wrong?" He said, "I've been told all my life that all dancing is wrong. Is it wrong?" And so, we sat down and we talked a little bit, and the first thing I thought of was my grandma, who was raised right up over here off Wiley Branch, born in 1916. And my grandma used to tell us when we were kids, she said, we used to square dance before dancing became a sin. That was kind of some little saying she used to have. We used to square dance before dancing became a sin. But there's a lot of wisdom in that statement, if you think about it. To simply portray a thing in a blanket way as being wrong is foolish. It's foolish. I'll give you an example. The young man that I mentioned this morning that I used the quote, about society determines our morals, and and not the Bible and all that. Not 2 weeks ago, he posted on his Facebook page. Well, I can't even use the words that he used, but let's just say that he doesn't hold conservative Americans in very high regard, particularly Trump supporters. And he had a lot of real choice words, and he just blanket statemented every single conservative in Canada and America. And one of his friends, who by the way is a liberal, chastised him for it. He says, when you make blanket statements across, just across the board statements, and you paint an entire, when you paint 60 million or 100 million people with a broad brush, he said, number one, you don't do yourself any favors, and you don't do your cause any favors. And his point was, a lot of them do the same thing to us. And when they don't do, conservatives, if they paint all liberals with the same brush, they don't do themselves. They don't do themselves any favors. And so, and the point I'm mentioning that is because there are so many nuances to being a conservative. There's a lot of nuances to being, look. Not all Democrats are Nancy Pelosi, all right? They're not all Ilhan Omar. And I find those to be two of the most reprehensible people I've ever encountered in any way in my whole life. But I'm smart enough to know that not all Democrats are them, all right? If we just want to be honest, there's a few Republicans I ain't that crazy about, and I wouldn't want somebody to paint me, and by the way, I'm not a Republican, although I vote Republican 100% of the time. All right? When the Democrats want to get off the sexual perversion train and the abortion train, then we'll talk. All right? When they want to leave those things behind and be right-thinking people, then I'll entertain voting for a Democrat. But until they do, I'm out. But I'm still not a Republican. I just have to vote that way because that's where my moral convictions are. All right? And so, now, with that in mind, let me get back to the original question. The idea of dancing. There's so many nuanced things because not all, you just can't say dancing is wrong because it's not all the same. Just like not all Republicans are the same and not all Democrats are the same or not all conservatives or liberals are the same, and you can't broad brush the whole thing. I'm pretty sure that what my grandma did in the 1920s, probably somewhere in the shadow of the Buttahatchee School, was not a sin. I'm just going to go out on a limb, all right? Just going to go out on a limb and say that the Buttahatchee square dance is not a sin. Right? There are other forms of dance that are not a sin. Look, I've never been a fan of ballet, and I don't know a thing about ballet, but I'm pretty sure that's not something that incites impure thinking. So you understand, you see where I'm going with this. Rather than say, is all dancing a sin or all dancing is a sin, let's just think about it, for example, in the terms of the works of the flesh in Galatians chapter 5. There are 4 works of the flesh that have to do with, for lack of a better term, sexual immorality. And 2 of them are uncleanness and lasciviousness. Uncleanness and lasciviousness. Now, thinking about those 2 words, the word uncleanness simply means the opposite of purity. All right, it's the word for purity with the letter A in front of it. Just like what we've studied so many times, you put the letter A in front of a word in the Greek, it makes it mean its opposite. It appears 10 times in the New Testament, and almost every time with some reference to moral impurity. And it's also, as people are known by the company they keep, so also are words, particularly in the Bible. This word for uncleanness is identified alongside sexual sins, such as homosexuality in Romans 1:24 through 32. It's identified with lasciviousness and covetousness, Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 19. It's mentioned among the sexual sins of Ephesians 5:1-7. Uncleanness, let it not be named among you. No unclean person has any inheritance in the kingdom of God. Uncleanness is something that is listed as to be put to death. Mortify in your body these mortify in your member these sins. Colossians 3 and verse 5. Covetousness and uncleanness are in that list. 1 Thessalonians 4:1-8, speaking about our bodies, says we are to possess our bodies in holiness and not in uncleanness. All right, so we have a definition now for uncleanness. Now we move to the work of the flesh known as lasciviousness. Now, some definitions are not very helpful. I remember when I was doing study on this a long time ago, I looked up, and it might have been in Vine's dictionary, but it said the definitions for lasciviousness was licentiousness. Well, 130 years ago, that might have been just as clear as crystal. But for most of us today, it's clear as mud, unless you've done some study on these words. So licentiousness is not a helpful definition for lasciviousness. But in Thayer's Greek English lexicon, the word lasciviousness has a number, the uses, by the way, the lexicon shows how the word is used in the New Testament text, as well as how it was used in the secular language. In other words, not just the biblical language, but how was it used in everyday common language. And the word is aselgia or aselgia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing, one of those is probably right. But one of the definitions that was found was this: indecent bodily movement and unchaste handling of males and females. Indecent bodily movements and unchaste handling or touching between males and females. Now, Thayer's is a long way removed from, Miley Cyrus, all right? In other words, he'd never heard of Miley Cyrus when he wrote that lexicon. He hadn't witnessed what most of us grew up witnessing from the 60s on up, basically to the present time. And so the point that I'm making is he didn't make this definition because he had an agenda about this thing. And so now, having an understanding of the words that are used, rather than saying all dancing is wrong or this is wrong, we just say, does this dance or does this activity, can it be associated with uncleanness or lasciviousness? All right? So rather than just saying all dancing, we'll say, well, what about, does it meet these criteria? And let me just mention this. And I'm going to ask Dwayne and Stephanie and John and Dana. Any of you are welcome to help me out here because we're all about the same age. All right, we all went to high school at basically the same time. All right, now when I was in high school in Dexter, Missouri, dancing was a big thing. And Rhonda, I see Rhonda nodding her head. She grew up in St. Louis. Dancing was a big thing. At my high school, there were probably at least 8 or 10 dances every year. Every year. The first Friday night after school started, the FFA had back to school dance. And then you had the football, football homecoming was always, there was always a dance for football homecoming. Then you had some kind of dance in the winter. And just about any I don't want to say social club, but any club on campus, if they wanted to have a fundraiser, they'd have a dance. They charge $2 or $3 to get in, and they might make, $800, $900, $1,000 and have a dance. There'd be 3 or 4 dances in the fall. Well, then we turn back around in the spring, and we'd have us a back-to-school spring dance. And then you had basketball homecoming, and there was always a dance. And then you had, after that, our prom was at the very end of the year, like within like a couple of weeks of the end of the year. Prom was one of the very last things on the calendar. So then you had 3 or 4 dances in the spring and 3 or 4 in the fall, and anytime anybody wanted to have one, they'd go rent them a sound system, and somebody come play music, and they'd have one. Well, then I moved to the South, and that all disappeared. I went to, when I went to Freed-Hardeman University, at that time Freed-Hardeman College, there were no dances at all at Chester County High School. Not even a prom. No dancing of any kind. Well, then I moved here. Now here's why I'm asking y'all. When you were in high school, was the prom the only dance at school? So you see, your experience in the 80s was vastly different than my experience in the 80s.
Our kids didn't get to have a prom.
Didn't have prom.
Our children.
Your kids, no prom.
No. We had to dance every Saturday after ball game.
Every Saturday. Every Saturday. After football game? See? I mean, that's a bunch. That's every home game. Okay, every home game. Well, that's still 5. That's still 5. And so, you see, when I was growing up, we heard a lot of preaching about dancing. Rhonda nodding her head. I'm sure her grandpa and her dad were, pretty hard on it. By the way, and rightfully so, because it was a big part of social life in the area where we grew up. Whereas in y'all's day, it was nothing. It was nothing. And by the way, as best I understand the prom here now, the dance is basically an afterthought. It's all about the dinner and the senior wills, and look, I don't even know what they do now, but it's just a completely different culture. Now, I'm not saying that dancing is good in Alabama and bad in Missouri. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm trying to say. But what I'm saying is, a lot of people probably didn't hear a lot of that because it wasn't a problem. Whereas where I grew up, it was a problem. And so when we start talking about activities, we start talking about activities. And by the way, I'm gonna get off on another rant here. It bothers me now, and look, it bothers me now to see so many members of the church having dances at their wedding receptions, because I just wasn't raised that way. I mean, it bothers me. I don't like it. And when I go, I don't participate. But that seems to be something that's gained in popularity. That never happened in Missouri among members of the church. You get disfellowship for that in Missouri when I was growing up.
You dance with your wife.
What?
You dance with your wife.
Yeah.
You could, but why? What's the point? Well, she might. Well, no, there wouldn't be anything wrong with it. But the point is, why? Why? And by the way, would everybody at that reception be dancing with their spouse? Well, no. And again, I'm not there, so I don't know what goes on. All right. But but obviously some of it probably going to get out of hand. But then there's other things that I see that probably people would condemn that I don't think that much about, which is I don't even know what to call it, but y'all know what that thing like that Cupid shuffle? Line dancing. Well, I thought that was just country music. All right, so if that's just line dancing across the board, all right, things like that to me, which again I don't do it. I mean, I got white people in my ancestry way back. All right, so I can't. I'm so uncoordinated, my eyelids don't blink at the same time.
I was
Okay, but you see, to me, again, I can see a difference in those types of things. And again, what I used to see in high school at our high school dances 35 years ago, those two things are not the same thing. And so I would never want to just broad brush an entire genre of activity as being a sin, unless, now I'm holding this up, this is my outline, but I'm holding up this outline because it has the definitions of the words that we're talking about. Okay? And so unless a thing violates these particular biblical principles, then I'm going to have a problem condemning it. It's just like I'll give you another example. Anybody here play Yahtzee? All right. Would anybody here, like, if we had a New Year's Eve gathering up there, would anybody be offended by me playing Yahtzee? Or anybody else playing Yahtzee? Or Monopoly? All right. But 60 or 70 years ago, what? They didn't like Monopoly and didn't like Yahtzee because of what? Dice. That's right.
I've had friends that would not play games that
They have dice. Yeah. I mean, you can't even play that little game where you remember the one with the little bubble and you punch it down and it makes the dice jump around?
That's trouble.
Trouble. Yeah. I love trouble. That trouble. I love trouble. That trouble. But again, there's a dice involved. And by the way, there's an old Noel Lawson song where in that song he talks about people going to go to hell for throwing them dice.
Didn't that go for card playing too?
And cards too. You used to go to hell for playing cards.
Yeah.
Right, but playing cards was a sin. Anything involving cards and dice was a sin. Rolling bones. All right, so now, any of y'all against playing old maid with a little kid?
No.
Or go fish?
No.
Or trouble? Or yacht? You see, now let me walk this back even a little bit further. Would there have been a time when it would have been not expedient to play those games? Sure. There would have been a time when playing those games would have not been expedient because of what? My example. Nothing inherently wrong with those things, but by example. But at one time, all card games were condemned as sinful. All games involving dice condemned as sinful. And so you see, I'm taking this question and I'm making a much broader application because I think it works. I think it works. And so we talk about any number of things, but getting back to the essence of dancing, you ask the question, does this activity associate itself with uncleanness? Does it associate itself with lust? Does it incite lust? Does it incite sexual desire? Again, does it harm my influence? Those things all have to be asked. Yeah, again, square dancing? No. What I grew up with in high school? Yes. And so we have to be careful, and we want to be biblical. And so to answer the question, no, not all dancing is wrong. Not all dancing is wrong. But what most of us think about when we hear dancing is probably wrong. Because when somebody tells me something about dancing, I'm thinking about again what I grew up with and what I saw as a young person. And so, the key is to be biblical, and secondly is we want to guard our influence. We want to guard our influence.
Well, you got to think when you say dancing, there's tap dancing.
Oh yeah, I didn't think about tap dancing.
There's bug dancing.
Bug dancing, all Bravel.
See,
Yeah.
that's just you're just up there jumping up and down.
Yeah. yeah. And all those things fit exactly into that other genre.
But it's called dancing.
But it's called dancing. That's right. By the way, you know, the Bible says that in 2 Samuel, David danced before the Lord. In Exodus it said the women, Miriam and the women danced. In Luke 15, what did the older son? What did the older son hear when he came in from the field? Music and dancing. So, so what exactly then did he hear? Did he hear what we think about when we think about dancing? No. He heard, and I don't know any other way to think. I'll just tell you what comes to my mind is that something like at Greek weddings or Italian weddings or Russian weddings, where everybody's kind of in like they call a round. It's just a kind of joining arms, and you're kind of going around in a circle and kicking, and that's what the young man heard. He didn't hear an episode of Soul Train. All right, so when you see Luke 15, and you see that he heard music and dancing, what he heard was something that was basically far removed from what most of us think about in modern vernacular. All right, any question about that? All right, I've got a couple more questions here. I'll just hold on to them because we've been here a pretty good while, and so. Any questions? Questions, comments, or smart remarks? John disappointed me. I opened him up with that smart remarks opening, and yeah. You just feeding him to Stephanie? Okay. Okay. All right. Very good. All right. Well, I appreciate y'all, and I appreciate your attention, your participation. And appreciate those that are watching. Let's close with a word of prayer, and then after that we'll be dismissed. Our Father in heaven, we are thankful for this day, and we're thankful for the opportunity we have to study your word. Father, to be discerning, to learn how to discern between good and evil, how to handle aright the word of truth. Father, we pray that in all things we'll seek to be biblical, faithful to the text in all that we do and say, Father, that we will guard our influence, that we might truly be salt and light in this tasteless and dark world. Father, we ask that you would go with us as we are dismissed tonight. Father, keep us in thy love and care. In Jesus' name, amen.